Morning, everyone. I'm Steve Ruby. I'm the counsel to the United States Attorney. The other individuals here at the front of the room are all far more distinguished than I am, so I'm sure you know them already, but just in case. This is Joe Ciccarelli. He is the supervisory senior resident agent for the FBI here in Charleston. With Goodwin, of course, the U.S. Attorney, and of course, Secretary of State Natalie Tennant, and Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas Ryan. We've called this briefing to announce federal criminal charges arising from the 2010 primary election in Lincoln County. I'll start the briefing by giving you the essentials of the charges, then you'll hear from Secretary of State Tennant and U.S. Attorney Goodwin, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Earlier this morning, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against Lincoln County Sheriff Jerry Bowman and Lincoln County Clerk Donald Whitten. Sheriff Bowman is charged in a conspiracy involving illegal absentee voting. Mr. Whitten, the county clerk, is charged with making false statements in the investigation of that conspiracy. As a result of the thorough investigation that's been conducted by the FBI and by the Secretary of State's office, we're pleased to be able to announce that Sheriff Bowman and Mr. Whitten have both agreed to plead guilty to the charges that have been filed against them. They've agreed to resign from office, and they've agreed that they will never seek or hold public office again. You should have received on your way in copies of the documents. They're called informations containing the criminal charges. You should also have copies of the plea agreements that have been signed by Sheriff Bowman and by Mr. Whitten, and all these documents will also be available on our website, which is at www.justice.gov/USAO/WVS. The conspiracy that's alleged in the charges and that's been admitted by Sheriff Bowman had two major steps. The first step involved the application for a voter to vote absentee. To vote it by an absentee ballot, a voter has to have a legally recognized reason that he or she can't vote in person on election day or during the early voting period. The conspirators in this case completed applications for absentee voting that falsified those reasons. So voters without any legal reason to get an absentee ballot could get one fraudulently. The sheriff himself completed more than 100 of these false applications. The second step in the conspiracy involved the absentee ballots themselves, as distinct from the applications. After voters received these fraudulently obtained absentee ballots, the conspirators, including Sheriff Bowman and Mr. Whitten, went back to voters' homes to be in the room illegally while the voters marked their ballots. In fact, while voters were in the act of voting, Sheriff Bowman told them which candidates he was backing in the election. And in several cases, Sheriff Bowman actually filled out voters' ballots himself. Mr. Whitten, the county clerk, has admitted that he lied to an investigator about providing Sheriff Bowman with absentee ballots to hand deliver to voters illegally. Mr. Whitten initially claimed that he'd never done that. He now admits that he did and that what he first told the investigator was false. Now, I'll emphasize that these are only charges. The defendants have agreed to plead guilty, and they've admitted their crimes to the U.S. Attorney's Office, but their guilty pleas still have to be accepted by the court. I'll also point out that the investigation in Lincoln County is very much ongoing, and so for those two reasons, our comments today are going to be limited to what's alleged in the charging documents and admitted in the plea agreements. And let me briefly describe the process from here on out so you know what to expect. The next step will be for the defendants to be arraigned and for a judge to be assigned to the cases. Hearings will then be scheduled for the defendants to enter their guilty pleas. It's up to the court, of course, as I already said, to decide whether to accept these guilty pleas. If the court does accept the pleas, then the defendants will proceed to sentencing. That's the formal court process. It's also important to note that these defendants have agreed, as you can see in the plea documents, to cooperate with the authorities. So as the court proceedings go forward, these defendants will be assisting us and the FBI and the Secretary of State's office with our investigation of other suspects in this matter. I'll now turn to Secretary of State Tennant.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming and being here. I would like to thank Steve, thank you personally, and personally thank U.S. Attorney Goodwin and to staff and the agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for all of their hard work in bringing this investigation to this stage that we have right now. As West Virginia's Chief Elections Officer, I describe where we are right now in a very simple concept. It comes down to fairness. It is unfair that someone would chip away at our democracy. It is unfair that someone would take one of our most trusted possessions, our vote, and belittle it. It is unfair that there are people right now who are sacrificing for us, who are away from their families, who are in harm's way, who are worried about what might be happening to them next to protect our way of life, while at the same time someone takes a piece out of that democracy. It speaks to the core and soul of who I am as an elected official. And I do not allow the integrity of the election process to be compromised. You've heard me say it before, and you will hear me say it again. I do not tolerate election law violations by anyone, regardless of party or position. This day has been a long day coming, a long time coming. There have been many times when the West Virginia Secretary of State's office has been criticized for not doing its job, when in fact the men and women of the Secretary of State's office were not only doing their job with diligence and professionalism, but with the commitment that is commendable in the sight of that criticism. They did not waver. And because of that, our record demonstrates that the Office of Secretary of State can be counted on to do its job, to thoroughly investigate allegations, all allegations, to produce results and protect the rights of honest voters. Every election and every vote are important, not for whom would be elected, but for what it represents. Our democracy, our freedom, and our ability to choose who we want to lead us, and I will not allow that to be jeopardized. The public's confidence in our elections is paramount. When I began my administration as Secretary of State, I vowed to address election law violations with the full force of the law. I've held to that position when it was easy, but more importantly, I've held to that position when it's difficult. And this is what you have here today. Thank you again to the U.S. Attorney's Office, to the FBI for the cooperative effort that we have had, and thank you to the staff of the West Virginia Secretary of State's office.
Thank you, Secretary Tennant. As the Secretary mentioned, it has been a very wonderful working relationship with the Secretary of State's office. They are diligent. They do deserve a great deal of the credit for why we are here today. And why we're here today, as Yogi Berra once said, it seems like deja vu all over again. About 7 years ago, I was an assistant U.S. attorney in the office that I now lead. I was working with a senior FBI agent by the name of Jim Wise, and we were prosecuting election fraud in Logan County, West Virginia. Agent Wise retired shortly after that investigation, but that investigation led to almost a dozen convictions, including the county clerk and the sheriff of Logan County. Fast forward to just a few months ago. Secretary Tennant needed another investigator, and Jim wanted to get back to work. Truth be told, that his wife said, "Jim, go investigate something. Leave me alone." The Secretary of State's office obliged and hired him as an investigator. And he set off to assist the FBI and the other investigators in the Secretary of State's office to see about these irregularities in the 2010 primary election there in Lincoln County. Jim worked with the FBI, of course, but he also worked with our office, with Thomas Ryan and Steve Ruby. Steve led the investigation from our standpoint, and what we have learned is that those irregularities in that 2010 Lincoln County primary were the result of fraud. So today we're here to announce charges against another sheriff and another county clerk, but this time from Lincoln County. And while the method of the election fraud was different in this situation, the goal was the same. And the goal was to hijack democracy here in the Southern District. The citizens' vote is the very foundation of our democracy. When that vote is bought or sold or obtained by fraud, democracy itself is in peril. The bad news is that people are still committing election fraud here in West Virginia in the 21st century. But the good news is that due to stepped up enforcement efforts by the state and by the federal level, the good news is that these criminals had to go to much greater lengths. And because they had to go to much greater lengths, their misdeeds became more obvious. This time there was an election contest that threw out the illegally obtained ballots. But that's not enough to make things right. That still shouldn't have happened. Every single honest voter who voted in that election had a part of their rights as an American taken, because the county clerk, the sheriff, and the people that they were working with decided to rig the vote. So looking again at the charges, Donald Whitten, who of course is the chief election official there in Lincoln County, was a key participant in the scheme. When Whitten was approached by Wise about the scheme, he lied. And that lie serves as the basis of the charges to which he has agreed to plead guilty. As a part of his plea agreement, you will note that he has admitted his role in the scheme, and he has agreed to cooperate against others involved in the scheme. You also note from the agreements that Whitten agreed to plead guilty before Sheriff Bowman. Now, Bowman's charge goes directly to the scheme at issue. Of course, the scheme involved trying to induce voters, and in fact inducing voters, to apply to vote absentee using applications like this. Bowman himself filled out 100 of these applications himself, stating falsely the reason the person needed to vote absentee, and then returning those applications to Whitten's office. Whitten made sure that those applications were processed, and in due course, the absentee ballots were mailed to the voters. Knowing that the voters would receive the ballots in just a few days, Bowman and others would return to the voters' homes. He would sit in the room with them while they voted, and he would tell them which candidates he was backing. The sheriff even voted some of the ballots himself. And the result, as you might imagine, the overwhelming majority of the absentee ballots cast went for the co-conspirators. Bowman, who was running for circuit clerk because he was term limited as sheriff, won the election, but only because of these absentee votes. Essentially, the co-conspirators stuffed the ballot box with these illegally obtained absentee ballots. They used and abused the absentee ballot process for their own gain. A process that is there for a very important reason, for very important people like our service members who need, when they're away, to be able to vote absentee. This kind of hijacking of the democratic process cannot be tolerated. And I want this case to send a simple message. You cannot steal elections in southern West Virginia. So I want to say it again. You cannot steal our elections. Now I know some people don't believe that. Some people think that you can get away with anything in an election here in West Virginia. Well, let me tell you something. The people who live here in the cities and towns, in the hills and hollows, we deserve honest elections. We deserve to have our votes counted fairly. We deserve it just as much as the people in Manhattan or San Francisco or anywhere else in America. And as long as I'm in this job, if we even suspect that an election's being rigged, we will spare no effort and we will spare no expense. And I know that Secretary Tennant's office will not either, to get to the bottom of it and make sure that the criminals who are responsible are brought to justice. I'm not naive. I know we have a lot of bad history, bad attitudes to overcome. But we're going to keep hammering away at it, one case at a time, one election at a time, until we win. Because honest elections are worth fighting for, especially here in southern West Virginia. So with that, we'll take questions. Thank you all for attending, and let's hear from you. Kenny?
How much of a rat's nest are you still dealing with down in Lincoln County?
Well, Kenny, as you can see from the documents, the investigation is ongoing. As you can also see from the documents, there's at least one other individual that's identified in there as a known person. Of course, we're not going to get into that today, but as you can see, the investigation still needs to continue.
This might be for Secretary Tennant. For those that are unaware, can you explain how this kind of popped on the radar, how you all discovered this fraud in the very first place?
Stephen, as you know, there are some, since this is a federal now investigation, I cannot talk about what the Secretary of State's office does and has been doing. You're very familiar with the code that I've talked about that does not allow us to divulge if someone has filed an affidavit of a complaint for an investigation. But if you remember back in 2010, there were folks who contacted our office, and we of course did our job. And that is what has led us here today, because the Secretary of State's office does its job when it comes to investigating all allegations, when it comes to producing results, when it comes to protecting the rights of honest voters. And you can see that through here. And I don't want to, I can't, as far as state code that I have to follow. But we did our job. And I can't go into the details of what we do to do our job, but I'm safe to say that we probably wouldn't be here if the Secretary of State's office had not done its job.
Just a follow-up.
You can probably explain more.
Well, I
can talk about it.
No,
I can't talk about it.
No, I understand that this has been a very good and cooperative relationship, but we didn't always have such a cooperative relationship, and that may, right. So, you know, by way of follow-up, as I pointed out, and as Bowman has admitted, he filled out 100 of these applications himself. 100 in one person's handwriting. So, if that gives you any idea as to one aspect of what led us here, that could explain it.
And Stephen, I might follow up on that, is that when I say we take seriously the allegations, they have to be serious allegations, and it can't be hearsay. It has to be based on what someone saw, and they have to be willing to sign that affidavit and to say that we think that this misconduct, this violation has happened. Because as you know, in the media, and as the media know, you hear all kind of things, and folks will say, well, why aren't they investigating it? Well, perhaps it was just hearsay, or he said, she said type of thing. We don't operate on that. We operate on what someone is willing to bring forward. And if they're willing to bring forward to keep our democracy and our election strong, then we are going to investigate that. And so, you know how it happened in 2010, when there were a lot of allegations that were put forward, but we would not act on hearsay. We acted on what someone filed, and we acted on what we did ourselves. We were there before anybody knew it. We were there before the press even knew anything.
Yes, sir.
With regard to the known person, I accept you can't say much more on that. Is the known person the only individual outstanding in this investigation, or are there other individuals being looked at?
We're going to follow the investigation wherever it leads. It's obvious from the documents right now that that is the only other person identified, but it also discusses other individuals known and unknown to the United States Attorney. We can't identify those individuals at this time, but suffice it to say, our investigation continues, and all the individuals who are responsible will be brought to justice. Yes, sir.
This is a problem we've seen a couple times now. Is there any plan to change how the process works to try to stop this from happening again?
Well, I can speak about it from our perspective. The problem wasn't the process. The problem was the people. If the people involved in any process are corrupt, that process is going to be corrupt. So it's not necessarily about the process. It's about the people involved. And these people were public officials. They were people who had taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the state of West Virginia and the United States of America.
We have taken some steps in correcting what you might see. This is from 2010. If you would pull up the new application for an absentee ballot, there are some changes to it. We attempted from the Secretary of State's office to make code changes, because as you look at this, you will see that there is some archaic language to this. When the state is asking for the doctor's phone number and name, and that could be violating some HIPAA law violations, and you see that this is somewhat archaic, and we have addressed that. But the problem was the legislature didn't pass it last year, and so we're working toward reintroducing that bill and making those changes as well, because it's my duty as the chief elections officer to make voting accessible to those honest voters who want a fair election. And we don't need more unrealistic restrictions put on our voters. We need to give them the ability to be able to vote and have their voices heard much easier. And I believe that this application, the older one, and even the one we're still using now, has those unrealistic restrictions on voters. We need to be able to give people the opportunity to go and vote, whether they're poor and don't have a vehicle to get to the early voting areas, or whether they're homebound. We need to give them the opportunity with realistic expectations.
Jennifer.
Nat, how discouraging is it for you that this can still take place in 2010?
Well, there's mixed emotions today, Jennifer, because the process worked in terms of what the U.S. Attorney and this collaborative effort that we have here. That is my job, to make sure that we catch those people who are trying to do wrong and trying to chip away at our democracy. So, in a sense, I know that I'm going to work to make voting more accessible to all voters, to honest voters. And at the same time, I also have, as part of my statutory duty, to do these investigations, which we have done. And if someone wants to try it, they're going to get caught.
For the people of Lincoln County, what happens short term? Is there someone ready to step into these positions as sheriff and clerk? What happens today, tomorrow?
Well, they'll be filled as required by the West Virginia Code. And I believe county officials are filled by the county commission. Now, what happens long-term, we're in an election year, and ultimately these positions will be filled by the voters of Lincoln County.
You have a preference when those gentlemen leave office? I know that the information's in the information, but would you like to see them more quickly the better?
Well, Steve outlined the time, the timing that there is going forward. What's going to happen from here is the case number is going to be assigned. It's going to be assigned to a judge. We're going to make a motion to schedule a guilty plea hearing, and that guilty plea hearing is going to probably be here pretty soon. They are required to resign before they enter their guilty plea, so it's going to be pretty soon.
Just to be clear, Secretary, will those two offices be on the ballot this November?
There are several different scenarios, especially for the county clerk's position. Yes, we already know that the sheriff's position is on the ballot for this November because it is up. The county clerk's office is not up, and there are several different scenarios that will take place for filling that county clerk's spot. There is a possibility that it could be on the ballot for November, and that would mean that the two or three political parties, Republican, Democrat, and Mountain Party, would nominate someone to then be on the ballot for a county clerk's position come November. That's the next scheduled election that they would be able to be on.
Anyone else? Thank you all again for coming. We really appreciate it.